Hello, everybody. My name is Steve. I'm a librarian here at the Addison Public Library, and I'm delighted to introduce our guest for this time around. She is named Clare Pooley, and Clare has written a book called The Authenticity Project, which we're highlighting for our winter reading program. So thank you, Clare, so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I'm delighted to be here all the way from London, England.
Exactly. It's great to have you by. So one of the first things I wanted to ask you, since we chose this book, we wanted to have more of like an uplifting book in winter time and so forth. And your book definitely qualifies for that. But I was most struck by the idea of the premise behind this, of someone writing in a book, in a journal, leaving it in a coffee house, and someone else picks it up, reads what that previous person had written, and then adds another entry into it. And it just seemed to me like an old school Hollywood film from like the 1930s or 40s. So what can you tell us about the inspiration for this book?
Oh, well, it was really inspired by my own experience because back in 2015, I was a stay-at-home mom with 3 kids. I quit my sort of high-flying job in advertising, and I decided to just be at home and be a great mum for a bit. At least that was the plan. And actually, what ended up happening was I ended up drinking way too much alcohol. I was drinking. Really sort of huge amounts. And I was in rather a bad way. And, if you'd looked at my social media feeds back then, if you looked at Facebook or Instagram, my life looked really perfect, and it wasn't. It was a complete mess, and nobody knew apart from me. And I knew I had to quit, and I was too ashamed to ask for help or to talk to anybody I knew. So I started telling the truth about my life, all of it, in a blog. And I called the blog Mummy Was a Secret Drinker. And I sort of poured my heart out onto this blog. And writing that blog sort of changed my life, and it changed the lives of thousands of people who found it. It became a memoir called The Sober Diaries. And I started thinking, well, if telling the truth about your life to a whole load of strangers can cause these magical things to happen, what might happen if other people did it too? And that's really where the idea behind the Authenticity Project came from. Although, in Julian, who starts off the Authenticity Project, he's a 79-year-old artist. He doesn't do it on the internet the way I did. He takes an old-fashioned journal and he writes the truth about his life in this little green notebook. And the reason for that is I'm sort of fascinated by handwriting. And, because we so rarely write, in the old-fashioned way these days,
Right.
too. And I thought, if you were to find a book in a cafe that somebody had written in handwriting and just left on a table, it would be really hard not to pick it up and read it, don't you think?
Yes, exactly. And I was struck by the person who is the social media, gosh, what's the word? I forget what they call them, influencers.
Influencer.
Exactly. And as I was reading this, I was actually listening to this book while walking the dog over like a 2-month period. And I was thinking of a couple different things. One was, of course, I knew that, having done my research into you, that you had an issue with drinking. And the other one was, I wonder if this influencer, if this was another aspect of your maybe not personality, but part of your life. And it turned out that both of those two kind of concealed into 2 different characters.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because my eldest daughter, who, when I finished writing the initial draft of the book, she must have been about 15. And she read the book, and I said, so, what do you think? And she said, you know what? She said, you do realize that all of these characters are a little bit like you. And I hadn't realized that at all. But there are 6 main characters, and they each have a sort of central flaw. They each have something in their lives that they're struggling with. And, all of those things to a greater or lesser extent, were inspired by sort of things I've been through in my own life. So you're right, Alice, the social media influencer, is a young mum, and she is struggling with being a young mum, you know, with the isolation that comes with having a small baby, and, you know, the physical exhaustion and the repetition and all those things that, you know, I mean, I found very hard at the beginning of motherhood as well. And I love being a mother. It's one of the most precious gifts ever, but it's hard. And, you know, and I wanted to explore that with people. So yeah, so quite a lot of what she goes through is based on what I went through back then.
Yeah, I wondered because, you know, knowing who Monica was, and she's the person I could relate to most, which is, you know, she has a lot of different habits and she's stuck in her way of doing it. And that's kind of how, again, kind of how I am a little bit. I was wondering if there was a portion of her, of that aspect with her, you know, making sure all the dishes are done and you know, for how many hours she would stay up till, you know, I think it was Thanksgiving. She was really like, I don't know how much hours of sleep she got, maybe 2 or 4 hours or something like that, but she was up way late at night preparing and all that sort of thing. I wonder if that portion was about you or from you. And then I thought of, you're right, Alice, with she had spent a number of, I guess you can say, narrative paragraphs that you've written that did discuss her, you know, like, I'm not sure if this man's really into me anymore. Is it because I have this baby and I'm so caught up in, you know, loving my new child and he's not really helping with the house or with, you know, our child? And I don't know, maybe I guess that has something to do with when you're walking and listening, it's a different portion of like reading. And I was able to think of all these things, you know, while I was listening. So that's interesting that you mentioned that. Did you say your daughter that had written it or that had read it?
Yeah. And yeah, Monica, there's an aspect of Monica that I really related to personally as well, which is the fact that she's, you know, she's a feminist and she's very ambitious and she's very independent and she's very able. And yet she has this sort of secret yearning to settle down and find the great guy and have kids and be a mom. And, you know, and, you know, I think I grew up in that era of being told that we could have it all and that, you know, we should have the big career and have the family. And, you know, it's difficult to have it all. It's difficult to have it all at the same time, you know.
Right.
And so yeah, so that's the aspect of Monica that I relate to the most, I think. And yeah, what I wanted is with those characters is for everybody to, what I hoped is that everybody would find at least one that they thought, oh yes, that person is just a little bit like me, you know. And most people who've, you know, contacted me having read the book have said exactly that, you know, oh, that person. So I'm interested that you feel Monica is the most like you.
Yeah, I was discussing your book with one of my colleagues here at the library, and we were talking about it, and she said, you know, while I was reading this, I couldn't get over the character of Julian. She said, I kept seeing this actor in my mind. And I know you might know where I'm going with this. I'd watched an interview with you a little bit previously to this, since we're meeting, and you said, you know, I didn't even realize that I was writing Julian as Bill Nighy.
Yeah.
And that's what she told me before I even read that or watched that interview with you. So yeah, I could totally see him in that role. And you know, I know what you guys, I think, had discussed in that interview. Gosh, it was that holiday film that Richard Curtis did, Love Actually.
Yes,
And
yes.
I love Bill Nighy in that. He was so fantastic. So this would be like a different portion of him, but he still had that rascally type, that, you know, that thing of I don't know how I could say this. He didn't seem to care too much about breaking his wife's heart until he realized, you know, what his life was like without her.
Mm.
And, you know, there's a sort of a twist in that relationship too. I'm actually jumping ahead of myself because, you know, I love some of these characters that you've created, but I kind of wanted to get an idea of what encouraged you to assemble this cast of characters for this book.
Oh, well, this particular cast, I mean, I wanted to explore a cast that were really diverse because, I think we spend so much time in our echo chambers, surrounded by people who are very like us, so the same sort of age, the same background, the same beliefs, and but I'm fascinated by groups of people who come together who are different backgrounds, different ages, different, have different desires, different understandings of the world. And I think real magic can happen when you get those eclectic communities. And I think we've learned that actually through this pandemic, how much we crave spending time with people we don't actually know that well, So I think that's where I started from is I want the people who find this book to be very different. And then as I was writing, I realized that, as I mentioned before, I think they each share the one thing they all have in common is that they all have a fatal flaw. They all have something they're struggling with. And it made me realize that actually it's those things, it's the things that we sometimes dislike the most about ourselves that are the things that actually make us unique and human and real. And the one character who doesn't have a flaw is Riley, who is almost perfect. And I found him really difficult to write as a result, because I realized that what I tend to do with these characters is I start from their faults and I build their characters around that. And right at the front, the epigraph at the front of the book is a Leonard Cohen quote, and it goes, "Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." And that was the reason I chose that quote, because that really is about how it's our cracks that make us that create the light.
That's interesting that you mentioned that Riley is someone without any flaws. And I mean, I did find one in him. He was probably, other than Monica, just because I could relate so much to her, Riley, I think, was my favorite character, just because he's something that I could never be, which is, so easygoing that he is himself, no matter where he is in the world. He's ready to just take it as it comes and just, hey, whatever's out there, that's, I'm doing for now. But I, you, I'm not sure, because when I think of his relationship with Monica, I know she was hesitant at first, and then she actually changed, I think, for the better in meeting him. So I thought it was necessary in her life for him to, to pop in, for her to like kind of let her guard down and let her mentality of it all has to be the way that I imagine it to be. And here's Riley, who I think he really did care for Claire. I mean, maybe he didn't love her because he was willing to go back to Australia, and it's like, all right, whatever. But I still really feel that, and you may feel differently, but I still feel that there was a big portion of him that really truly did care for her, I
Oh,
should
yeah,
say.
no, I think so, absolutely. And, I mean, what he plays an interesting role in the book, I think, because he's almost like a touchstone. He's the one that, as you say, is really happy-go-lucky. He's very relaxed. He's very kind and considerate, and he's just, he sees the best in everyone and everything. And he doesn't worry about everything the way that the other characters tend to. And as a result, I think he throws each of the other characters into a sort of sharp relief, if you like. He's sort of, he, as I said, he's their sort of touchstone. So although I found him a tricky character to write, he was, to me, in a way, almost the linchpin of the group of them. I think without somebody like him, they might have all fallen apart.
Right.
The group might have fallen apart.
Exactly. Now, when we first got on in this discussion, I mentioned that it reminded me of like an old school Hollywood film. And like you said, you had originally written the Sober Diaries, did you say?
Yeah.
As a blog, and you're doing it in a book form. So obviously, as a writer, you could go over and you could have had it well, that would be difficult, right? Because you really did sort of need it to be a physical, a tangible book or a journal. So I'm just curious on what convinced you to take it in this direction, like the more old school type of, like you said, handwriting and so forth. I've gotten so out of touch with handwriting. It's my handwriting is so terrible now, and I'm guessing a lot of other people are too. But what was it about putting it in a journal and then that can like lead to other people taking it, moving on, and entering their lives into the story?
Well, it was partly the handwriting thing, because I think you can tell so much from people's handwriting.
Hmm.
When we communicate by typing, it strips out all that, the character and the understanding that can come from looking at somebody's handwriting. You can tell not just what sort of person has written something, but what mood they were in often, whether it's angry or hurried or loving. There's a lot of sort of cues you can get from handwriting. So it was partly that, but I think also the old-fashioned thing for me was quite kind of important, because when I started writing this, what I wanted to explore is how, as a modern society, particularly in urban areas, I think we have lost touch with the people around us. We're more connected than ever to strangers on the other side of the world, via social media and, Zoom and all these other things. But often we don't know the people right next door to us. And
Right.
when you take a physical notebook, it can only travel so far. It forces you to explore the people in your immediate surroundings. Whereas, if Julian had decided to write his truth in a blog, he it would have connected to more people, but much, much further away. It wouldn't have created those real life connections that I think we all really miss. I think we all crave those, that old feeling of people in the community coming together.
Mhm. That's really interesting that you put it that way. What I was going to ask next was about communication and miscommunication in your book. It seems like there's a lot of communication, definitely, but also a lot of miscommunication. So,
Hmm.
was that something that I'm guessing based on your response there, maybe not have given it too much thought, but now looking back, does that does that ring true for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of deliberate in that I'm quite fascinated by memory and how our memories play tricks on us. And I think the person who is the genius of miscommunication in the book really is Julian, who starts the book, and he starts this book that's all about authenticity, and yet he is the character who is the least authentic, in the cast. And I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but he struggles with the truth. And what I'm fascinated about with him is I don't think he intends to lie ever. I think where we as a reader catch him out in his mistruths, so to speak, it's not, he doesn't intend to lie. He just, being an artist, he just tells himself the story of his life in a way that he finds more palatable. And the more he tells the story to himself, the more he starts thinking it's real. And I think we do that quite a lot. Our memories are not as accurate as we think they are. And often we sort of, we tell, over time, we will tell a story about a photograph or an occasion or an anecdote so many times that we sort of forget sometimes which bits were real and which bits, we think were real. And I'm quite fascinated by that. I'm fascinated by the way our minds can play tricks on us, particularly if we don't like remembering where we've been less than perfect.
Right. So in that instance, we're sort of like unreliable narrators in
Mhm.
books.
Of our own
And that,
lives. Yeah. And this was the interesting thing for me of writing the blog that I wrote, because, people often when people talk to me about the memoir, the Sober Diaries, they say, you know, what they like about it is the fact that it's so real and so raw. And that's because it's based on what I wrote at the time. And what I tell people is that if I was to try to write that story now, I couldn't do it, because I cannot remember how bad the bad bits were. And I think that's a sort of self-protection mechanism. I think we don't like to remember the really nasty, tricky parts of our lives, and we sort of tend to look back at them with slightly rose-tinted glasses, you know. And I could only write it because I had literally written it at the time, and it was the book was then based on that material. But I couldn't do it now. I couldn't. My memory is just doesn't take me there.
So the title of this book, again, is The Authenticity Project. Here's the US book cover. And I do see a cover or more of one of the books, the same books that you have, translated into a different language in Spanish. Here's that one. Yes. And we have a bunch that we're giving away to our patrons in both English and Spanish to read your book this winter. And my colleague that I'd mentioned earlier, when she had read it, she said, the Spanish translation for The Authenticity Project is called And What If We Told the Truth? Interesting. I didn't realize that you could really call the same book two different titles for two different translations.
Different titles all over the world, actually. So the German edition is called Mondays at Monica's. So wow. Completely different again. One of my favorites is the French edition, which is called the Fabulous Voyage of the Notebook of Things Unsaid.
That's a long title.
It is, but it's very, you can see how French it is. It's got that sort of that lovely sort of romantic, whimsical sort of nature to it.
And I actually did feel some of that when they did go to like the Eiffel Tower and stuff like that. I did feel some of that romanticism, I guess, in your book. So, gosh, when I was reading this, one of the things I noticed that it did seem like a lot of the characters were somewhat cynical. Monica, I think everybody but Riley was cynical. Was that something that, was a conscious move on your part, or was it just that these are the characters or maybe I'm just reading too much into it?
I think it's a British thing, maybe. I think we do, certainly Londoners tend to have this sort of slightly cynical, ironic view of the world. And I think maybe, and that, Riley isn't British, he's Australian.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's why he doesn't share it. And actually Mrs. Wu, who she's a Chinese heritage, and she doesn't have that sort of same sort of world weary sort of cynicism to her either. So yeah, I think maybe it's a particularly London thing.
I liked when Mrs. Wu in the book, she mentioned, and I really made me think about something, which she said was, people in England, people in the United States, they treat their elders as something to be set aside and pushed off. Whereas in her culture, those are people to be respected and to come to for wisdom, because after all, they have experienced so much. Was maybe that was just a throwaway line to you, but it just seemed very well thought out and just something that you maybe wanted to put across to readers. I'm not sure.
Well, yes, I did actually, and because it does bother me that I'm getting older too, and it bothers me that people do in our in the UK, and as you say, I think perhaps in the States as well, you feel, I think maybe particularly as women, that you become more invisible as you get older, and you're seen as less relevant. We tend to idolize youth, and yet older people have so much experience and wisdom, and just so much to share, and so much ability to help. And it seems a shame that we don't recognize that. And actually, my next novel, which comes out in the beginning of June, is called Iona Iverson's Rules for Commuting. And Iona Iverson, one of the main characters, is 57, and that's something that she struggles with and desperately wants to change, is that sort of feeling of being invisible and irrelevant. And I can just, spoiler alert, by the end of the book, she really shows that she isn't either of those things.
Good, good.
So
in this one, I noticed, especially for the title of the Authenticity Project, you mentioned that Julian would sort of mold his worldview and memory to be what he'd hoped it would, what he would want it to be. But it also seemed that a lot of the folks in this book presented themselves as not necessarily who they really were. So for instance, Mrs. Wu's son, who has a relationship with another man, he's willing to go ahead and just let everybody, at least his mother, I should say, believe that he's going to marry a nice Chinese lady, or was it, I forget, not Chinese, right? Is it Korean, Mrs. Wu?
No, he's Chinese heritage.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, China. So she was really frustrated and upset by that. But you mentioned Julian Hazard actually had done the same thing, where he presented himself as, no, I'm no longer drinking, until that one instance. Oh, I'm one drink will be fine. And then of course, for so many people who struggle with substance abuse and alcohol, one drink will turn into many more, because that feeling of wanting it is just too strong. So was that again, was that a conscious decision? Because if you call it the authenticity, and like you said, Julian is not necessarily authentic.
Yeah, so, I think what I was trying to put across is the fact that being authentic isn't easy. Even when we really want to people to know the real us, even when we really want to tell show the truth, it can be really difficult, because we often don't want to know what the truth is ourselves. So Hazard, really, he's very open about in the book, in the notebook, about his addiction and what a terrible person he's been. And he doesn't try to hide anything, but he reaches the point, as you say, where he actually sort of struggles to be the person he wants to be. And and I think we all do that. I think all we can do is aim to be as authentic as possible, as much of the time as possible. But I doubt there's anybody in the world who manages to do it all the time.
Yeah, I know for me, it's become a little bit easier to be authentic once you get older and you stop caring so much about what other people think of you. And it's like, hey, this is me. I'm going out in my shorts and it's 10 degrees outside, and I'm going to get the garbage can and bring it into the garage. I mean, just something is similar to that, like, oh, what is everyone going to think of the neighbor, the crazy neighbor who walks out with the shorts and 10 degrees?
But you know what? Sometimes I think also when you get older, you realize that sometimes the truth is not always the best thing. So, so the issue that I explored with Mrs. Wu's grandson, Baz, who is, as you say, is gay, is the fact that he's not ashamed of being gay at all, and nor should he be. And he's got a boyfriend he is madly in love with, but he doesn't want his granny to know. And the reason he doesn't want her to know is because she's just of that age where he knows she won't understand, and she's quite old and she's not going to be around forever. And what he says is, does she really have to know? Wouldn't it be just easier for her if she lived the rest of her life thinking, I'm going to settle down with a nice lady who can help me run the restaurant, and we're going to have lots of babies, and it's all, why does she need to know? And I think that's an interesting question. You know, I think sometimes on, you know, what we sometimes our need to tell the truth hurts other people. So it's not always the right way to go necessarily. There are white lies are some we sometimes tell to protect other people.
Yeah, yeah. So again, going with that same subject of authenticity, it seems like, at least from my perspective, after having read the book, after, learning of how the characters and their arc of how they were in the beginning to the end, it seems that, well, you did a great job because, when you talk about authenticity and people were sort of, some of them were lying to themselves, only to at the end realize that, wow, I think because of this book, because of the people I've met, because I've shared who I am and, my truths, that I have actually become more authentic. I've become more okay with who I am. And they, have actually changed through the book too. And I'm guessing that was probably something that you had put in place, just thinking for the characters themselves, how they start here and then what they're going to be like when they end after this journal.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to explore the fact that when we make ourselves vulnerable, we actually make ourselves really strong.
Mhm.
And I found that when I published my memoir, that I was really scared the few days before it came out. I thought, why am I doing this? And is it too late to cancel? And it was too late to
Mhm.
cancel. And it was, I was terrified, and I was going to be on national TV and national radio and national press and talking about the most embarrassing and awful parts of my life. And I was, it was terrifying. And I realized once I'd done that when you sort of lay your vulnerabilities on the table, there is nothing left. People don't have anything left to hurt you with. There's nothing you can hurt yourself with. You're sort of, and that makes you feel like a superhero. It makes you feel very invulnerable and very brave. And I think that's what they all go through to a greater or lesser extent. They realize that actually, in making themselves vulnerable, in putting themselves out there, they have actually, all in one way, shape, or form, made themselves stronger. And I think they all, as you say, they all sort of like themselves more at the end as well. They all learn something about themselves. But it was important to me that none of them were perfect. None of them start off perfect, and they don't end up perfect, because life isn't like that. All you can do is just aim to be a little bit better.
Right. Yeah. So when I finished this book, I was thinking a lot about, like what you'd mentioned before about white lies. Sometimes it's better to tell a white lie, less people will be hurt. There might not be frustrations, arguments, that sort of thing. Have you seen the movie The Invention of Lying?
No, I haven't, but it sounds like the sort of thing I'd like to see.
Ricky Gervais was in it. Jennifer Garner was in. I think there was another big named actor in it. But basically, the idea of the story is that I think Ricky Gervais cannot lie for whatever reason. It's been about a decade or more since I've seen it.
Mhm.
But all of these, people are, or no, that's what it is. He's the only one that can lie, and everybody else tells, the truth, I guess, or not tells the truth. They act, yeah, that's what it is. They tell the truth. He doesn't, and they're all just like crazy. Like, what is wrong with this man? I don't know. It was something that I thought of after I finished reading your book. It made me think of, is there a similarity between the two? I'd have to ask Claire and find out. But since you haven't seen it, you don't have an opinion, you can't. So I think, let's see. Going through all my questions, we had bounced back and forth. I have a list of questions here, as I think most interviewers do. But I think the last question I really do have for you is, and it's something you've touched on already, if you think that we as a people in general lie to others and even ourselves more often than not about who we really are.
It's interesting because I I think it's all about language, isn't it? Because I wouldn't say, personally, I wouldn't say that we lie about ourselves necessarily. I think we like to present the best version of ourselves, or at least a good enough version of ourselves.
Mhm.
So for instance, if you if you're putting a picture on Instagram of you and your family, you know, you go through your camera roll and you find the nicest one. You don't pick out the one that shows,
Right.
you know, everybody looking a bit grumpy and pissed off. You know,
Yep.
you find the one where everyone's smiling and looking happy. Is that lying? No, it's not lying, but it's not necessarily the most authentic shot you could have chosen.
Mhm.
And I think the problem with that is that when we look at other people's, you know, the impression that other people give of their lives, it has that sort of rose tinted glow to it, and it makes us then feel inadequate and feel like our own lives are somehow not as good as they should be. So I think the overall, so I don't think we lie, but, or at least not that much, but I do think we are not necessarily authentic. And I think and the result of that is it makes us all slightly less happy than we might be. So
Interesting. I'd never thought of it that way, because while you were talking, I was thinking about Alice again, who is the, you know, the influencer online. And she was saying, you know, I have all of these followers and they don't really know who I am. And that's something that you know, you've gone through and you did yourself. But
they think that her followers think that she is the perfect mum with, you
right.
know, she posts these pictures of her and her baby looking perfect and gorgeous.
Mhm.
And we know, the reader knows that her life isn't like that at all. And she's really struggling, and that, you know, behind the perfect shot is a whole load of mess and chaos, you know. And the sad thing is that the people following her, those shots aren't making them happy either. Those shots are
Yeah.
making them feel like they're inadequate and their lives are not matching up to where they should be. So yeah, so I think it does spread this sort of, this general feeling of discontent, and I don't think that's good for us as a society.
Yeah, totally agree with you. Well, Claire, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to put up these two again, so in case people are watching this from other places around the Addison district and that sort of thing, let your friends know, let your relatives know. Claire, it was a pleasure having you on today. I loved your book, and I'm looking forward to your next one next year in June, you said.
Yes, yes, that's right.
Okay.
And well, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed chatting. And, you know, to anyone out there who's read the book, who's recommended it, who's, you know, who's contacted me, I mean, thank you so much. There's something so magical about characters that you've just invented in your own head becoming real to other people. And you know, I love hearing that other people have met and enjoy these characters the same way that I have. So thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.